Hi, good evening, everyone, and thank you for participating in the Spring 2021 Yaqui Human Rights Clinic. A couple of preliminary announcements. I'm posting this under the conditions regarding the pandemic. Um, Unfortunately, I have a laptop beside this one, which is credentialed through the U of A Access system. Because we never anticipated being off campus for so long, one of the security protocols in the U of A Wi-Fi system is a 30-day, roughly 30 days, it reconnects with your Wi-Fi. And it asks for a new password. I could be wrong about the 30 days, but it basically clicks through, and under normal circumstances, it's not a problem because if you're on campus regularly, it just refreshes the security protocol. Unfortunately, it isn't working because I'm not on campus. It's an interesting thing. So it's Wi-Fi, but again, you have to be on campus to access the security protocol and refresh it. What that does is it gives you access to um, the shared cloud space. For our purposes, it gives me access to a program called Camtasia. And you might want to know about it because we're having to communicate through novel means these days. Um, but amazingly, Zoom actually does real-time recordings, which Camtasia does, but there's also editing, finer editing features. And it's really an appropriate program for doing distance learning and the like. My understanding is that the top shelf, the professional software is, I believe it's called Adobe Professional. It's by Adobe. But I've looked at some of the screenshots, and my familiarity with Adobe is that it's it's very complicated, but you get a very high quality product. But Camtasia is just one of many that are encroaching now that are easier to use. And again, I have to tip my hat to Zoom because when this pandemic started, it just didn't have the same number of features. So to come full circle, I'm recording this on Zoom now, and then tomorrow, which will be Wednesday, January 20th, I will be on campus. I just go into the parking lot, light up the laptop, it'll search for the U of A Wi-Fi, and that's when it refreshes the security protocol. I think I have to change the password. And then the quality of these videos will astound you. All right, so enough of that. And also the materials. So I have to be able to access the materials. But having said that, again, I can start now, and I'm going to start now. Okay. So I've contacted all of the students at this point, and I have had a chance to have, at a minimum, virtual meetings, and we're kind of underway, but we need to define the scope of the clinic. We need information to fill in the background, and to that extent, this is really what my objective will be for the month of January, I think. So this clinic, and I'm going to mention some of the most strange kind of minutia details, but it needs to be referred to as the Yaqui Human Rights Clinic. That is going to be an interesting challenge because it's actually listed in specific reference to the Pascua Yaqui tribe, which are here in Tucson city limits. They're a federally recognized Indian tribe, and this project focuses on the human rights situation of their sister pueblos in Sonora, Mexico, which are constituted as the 8 Rio Yaqui pueblos of the traditional Yaqui territory in Sonora, Mexico. I say that, and I'm going to say it one more time, the 8 Rio Yaqui pueblos in the traditional Yaqui territory in Sonora, Mexico. Again, I say that because in the legal drafting, you have to tell the reader who your client is, who are the claimants. And you're going to see, and I think it's one of the cool things about the clinic, is that the names are in Yaqui. And so one of the kind of simplifications when you're doing petitioning and statements of claim, et cetera, is you have to be able to quickly define the legal boundaries of who has standing, who is your client. Sounds trivial, but I spent a couple of hours on it in the early days, memorizing the 8 pueblos and then having to figure out a way to roll through the deep complexity of this case in a very simplified format. Speaking of formats and petitioning, in the announcement that I posted, you will see a invitation for submissions to the UN expert mechanism. So if we just pause for a moment, I'm going to flip over to screen share and get to that. Now, before I do, I just want to elaborate and reemphasize some very, very basic course housekeeping issues. Syllabi, your timesheets, that will go up tomorrow. I'm not personally worried about it because I've been able to communicate, I think, quite effectively in this, the first several days of the course with the students, and we're kind of off and running. And so that will be up tomorrow. The meeting time. Okay, so it's a small clinic, and under these circumstances that we are in, which are in flux, the idea of an on-site, on-campus meeting, I think, is not possible. There will be some gradients listed, and this speaks to the class time in the syllabus, and really just me as the professor speaking to, okay, so how are we going to meet? How are we going to conduct business to get through this? So what I'm saying is that I don't think the on-campus option is a realistic one. So to get right at it, it will have to be under other. So Zoom, etc. That's all fine. And in terms of having a traditional time slot, because of the small size of the clinic, I don't feel like I need to tie that in as a mandatory piece, because I'm going to be posting these video lectures with substantive materials as we work together concurrently, so either through Zoom or some other mechanism, on the research projects. So that's a job that I take really seriously, because that's ultimately a reflection on the service that we're providing, and also my undertaking to provide you with the best training possible in this field. So before I pause this video, because it will actually create a separate file when I reopen it, let me also just talk briefly about the nature and the scope of this work. And part of that is a reflection of the times that we are in, but also the fact that this is a rolling issue, that the advocacy needs of the 8 Rio Yaqui pueblos is always an ongoing issue. And also, too, that in this type of work, which is very, very analogous to like nonprofit human rights advocacy, one has to be very strategic about what the objective is, the resources that are required to be brought to bear to reach that objective. And then finally, once that objective is achieved, how does it fit within the needs of the community, of the needs of the claimants, the needs of your client, and in this case, the 8 Rio Yaqui pueblos and the residents in and around those pueblos. All of this to say is you're not going to be able to find a turnkey that solves all problems. This is thematic to the study of law. It's, I think, endemic to first-year law curriculum and the approach to the common law, which is to say that we have a preference towards formal rules that are very simple and straightforward. One that I really want to talk about is the rule on the bike path that says you have to ring your bell and say passing on the left and or both. So there are simple rules like traffic rules, but finding rules that solve much more complicated problems is a totally different scenario. And that's what this clinic is deeply, deeply immersed in. And so one has to be very, very focused on what the objective is, because it's very easy to lose sight in the face of what is the suffering of others, the not just sort of systemic suffering, but ongoing suffering and the disadvantages and the hardships that are visited upon a group of peoples by the state action. That's a lot to unpack, especially in this day and age. But I'm hoping one of the things that you'll take out of the course is a way to draw the finer distinctions in terms of harms, legal harms, and the kinds of remedies that you can develop to correct those harms. Again, the old common law maxim, where there's a right, where there's a remedy. So to come full circle on that note, we're in a field that is progressing rapidly, that is the field of Indigenous human rights, to have both an international and a domestic dimension. But you have to understand that it was only recently that these convergences and norms and principles, and in fact, laws at the domestic level have emerged. By recent, I'm not talking about the last ice age, I'm talking about the 1980s. Really, that's been the doctrinal development. It goes back, the doctrinal development of Indigenous human rights goes back to some of the earliest recorded writings of Spanish jurists as a canon of human rights emerging from the history of the Spanish conquest of Indigenous America. But it's really procedurally in the last 30 to 40 years that you really see this rapid growth in formalizing the rights of Indigenous people. So what do I mean? I'll give you a really easy example, and we'll talk a little bit at a comparative level. This is just one example. So in Ontario, the province of Ontario, which has enormous mineral reserves, not unlike the state of Arizona with respect to copper. The permitting process in Ontario at the state level under state law, this is provincial law, now requires the proponent for the exploration permit to address any overlap with the rights of Indigenous peoples. So that's actually it's in the Mining Act. So the director of mines, there's sort of a tick the box. You actually have to go through this very formal process. That was not the case 30 years ago. Gosh, 50 years ago, if you can imagine this, in the common law in Australia, there was no reference whatsoever to the idea of Indigenous title. And if you just take a quick sort of armchair view of Australian history, it's part of the Commonwealth, right? It was originally a colony of England, of Great Britain. And the idea of Aboriginal title didn't exist. And instead, if you were a law student trying to get your license to practice law in Australia, it was an examinable topic to understand the idea of terra nullius, which is you take the land empty as it is, empty as you see it, right? So that's crazy. So that was overturned in the Mabo decision, and we'll make some reference to that. So to come full circle, I want to have fun with this. And let me stop now. I understand I have not given the full scope of what we want to do with our client group in light of this unknown work that's already been done in the situation that they're in. So let me pause, post the UN notice. I'm going to go through it, and then I'm going to relate to you how it applies to our client group. Okay, so thank you. Just one moment, please.